Quick announcement moving forward. I know until now I've asked all of you guys to be congregated in these two sections over here so that, we can be a nice close knit community and I can see all of you here. I'm now going to say the opposite. I want you all to spread out. Yeah. It's just, you don't have to today, but from now on, I want you to space. We have plenty of space. Take as much space as you need. I don't know. Some of you guys get crazy during your prayers, and you need a full arm span reach to I don't know what you do, but yeah, take your space, take your time. That reminds me of a funny story when I was in Africa a couple months ago, in Ethiopia. Man, those people are on fire. Like they are the most passionate people that I have seen yet, and they can get kind of weird. They can get kind of weird in prayer. And I wished I had seen this, and I didn't. But Pastor Bay, who was the one taking pictures, he came to us afterwards, and he was like, "Did you know there was a guy doing somersaults during prayer?" And, we thought he was joking, but he like demonstrated for us. He was like, "No, he was praying on his knees, and all of a sudden he like rolled forward while he was praying in tongues." And we were laughing. And so apparently things can get crazy when you pray. So you never know. So that's just to say, take your space, take as much space as you need, because we are starting to take this COVID-19, the coronavirus, more and more seriously. For those of you that have been following along on the news, we now have over 700 confirmed cases in the state of New York. It's growing uh, incredibly fast, quickly. On Wednesday, I think it was like 500, and I announced that I highly doubt that it's 500. It has to be at least 1,000, maybe even a couple thousand people who have it, and we just haven't announced it yet because they haven't been tested. Right now, it's at 700, which makes me think we have at least 2,000 people, at least 2,000 people in the city who have this disease. So that's all to say that we need to be careful moving forward. Our church has decided to take a few measures to try to combat the spread of this. We are suspending all weekday services. I know last week we announced that we'll be suspending all morning services. Well, we are now effectively suspending all weekday services, all weekday activities. So Sunday will be the only day that this church is opened. I know some people like to just come here to study and to pray on their own or to read Bible on their own. That's perfectly fine. You are still more than welcome to do that, as long as you follow the rules of quarantine that I'm about to explain to you in detail. Everyone knows how to get into the church even when it's locked. So you guys are free to do that, but we won't be having any church services or any official church events throughout the week. The only time we'll be meeting will be on Sunday. And on Sunday, we'll just be having the morning service for the Archaeum ministry. They'll all be leaving. There will be no lunch that is provided. Lunch will be provided just for you guys. You guys are special. Actually, it's mostly just for those who stay for both our first and second services, but we usually have food remaining. And I think today you guys were all able to eat, so which is how I think it'll be moving forward. But just keep in mind that lunch is not. We will no longer be officially having lunch that is provided by the church anymore. It'll just be a light snack. And as you have all witnessed today, we will have no live worship as well. And it's one of the saddest things that I have to announce, because I love our live worship, and our worship team has been doing so well and growing very, very much. But this is for the safety of everyone involved. But it's actually our worship team who will have to gather more to worship and practice. We're trying to minimize all gatherings as much as possible. So we won't have any more live worship. But don't worry, because we have wonderful media team that's going to improve every week, right? Today it was a little awkward because it was our first time doing it, and we got to be honest here, right? But it was our first time. It was our first time doing it like this. We have now, we have one trial and error under our belt. So next week it's going to be better, and the week after it's just going to get more and more, smoother as we go. Yeah, by the end of, in a few weeks, you guys will not even notice that we used to have live worship, because it'll just be so smooth. But that is what we are doing right now moving forward. The second announcement is that we are enforcing much stricter quarantine rules now. Because this is officially a pandemic, and we want to act accordingly. For those of you who have been in contact with someone from China or Korea or Italy or any of the high-risk areas, if you know that you've been in contact with anyone from those areas, we ask you to quarantine yourself for at least 14 days, at least 2 weeks. Even if you are healthy, if you've been in close proximity with anyone from those high-risk regions, we ask you to please self-quarantine yourself. So we have a lot of Korean congregants here. If you for some reason come into contact with someone who recently came from Korea, please, we ask you to follow this rule. The same is also true if you have been in contact with someone who is now currently being investigated or suspected of having a confirmed case. We know we have some people who are working in hospitals. If you know that you have come in contact with someone who may have the disease, once again, we ask you to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks. And it's 2 weeks starting from your last day of exposure with that person. So we really ask you to stick by these rules. One more is we ask you to also quarantine yourself if you feel sick with any symptoms of the cold that could potentially be the coronavirus. This includes even just the slightest fever, right? Even just the slightest cough. If you feel like something is wrong with your body, it's most likely the cold. In extreme cases, it'll be the flu. I don't think you'll have the coronavirus, at least not right now, because our Flushing area is relatively safe. But we are taking extreme precaution. So if you are even a little bit sick, we're currently asking you to stay at home, which is why we're missing a lot of members today, because they are abiding very carefully to the instructions of the pastor. We ask you to stay at home until at least 7 days since your last symptom. Does that make sense? So once you are completely free from all of your sick symptoms, then wait another 7 days, and then you can join us again. So I know this seems a little strict. It seems a little unfair because I know the majority of our members want to come to church, which is a great problem to have as a pastor. It's great that our people want to come, and I'm telling them not to. But it's something that we must do in these current circumstances. So we please ask you to abide by these rules. I know most of our EM are very young, and for our young people, I want you not to fear. Because even if you get it, it's not that. You guys have read the news, right? Even if you get it, it's not that bad. So you guys don't have to worry about it. But please do be respectful that you guys can be transmitters and carriers. And we have elderly people in our congregation, and we have some people here that work with elderly people at home and at their jobs. So we please ask you to take caution just as much as everyone else, and take this disease very, very seriously. So those are the quarantine rules that I ask all of our church members to please abide by. A few more things related to this. Starting from next week, we'll be asking everyone to come to our church through our front door. Some of you are like, have we not always been using the front door? Nope, no, that was the side door, right? We have a dedicated side door for our church. We now ask you to come through the front main doors, which are the main big wooden doors next to the parking driveway. And we'll probably be locking this door so that people won't be coming in this way. And the reason is we want you to come this way, come down that way, down the stairways, and the first place you should be going is into the bathroom to wash your hands. I kid you not. This is the reason why we're locking the front door, because if we don't do this, I know for a fact that you guys won't wash your hands because it's not a habit for you. So that's literally the reason why we are doing this. We ask you to please go wash your hands, because that's actually the most important thing that you can do to prevent the spreading of this disease. So that will be next week. Also, for those of you who feel a little tentative, who want to take extra precautionary measures, you are more than welcome to wear masks at church during service. No one's going to judge you. If things get more serious, I might actually enforce that people wear masks mandatorily on Sunday. I don't think we'll get there anytime soon. Hopefully not. But if you feel like you want to take that extra measure, know that you are more than welcome to do so. There will be no judgment here whatsoever. And last but not least, we have now that people are, some people may not be able to attend Sunday services, we are offering an online way of giving your offerings and donations. I should have prepared a slide for it, but I think the easiest way to do it is through Zelle payment, right? You guys all have a bank that offers Zelle payment. The email that you can send it to is nybelovedchurch@gmail.com. Fairly simple, right? New York, nybelovedchurch@gmail.com is the email through which you can send Zelle payments for your offering if you want to do that online. We will also be upgrading our live stream services. For our Korean ministry, we have a lot of, we're streaming, we're giving out files for our Sunday services. We'll be uploading other weekday services on our Google Drive as well. For our EM service, we've already been uploading all of our sermons on YouTube and live streaming them, so there's nothing really new for us. But now that we are officially moving as many things online as possible, I do believe that maybe we should upgrade our camera or something. I don't know. We'll figure something out. We'll work it out. And I believe. Oh nope. I have the most important one left. So this whole thing is called the epidemiologists. Help me out here. What's the word I'm looking for? Epidemiologists, right? Epidemiologists are calling this social distancing. Right, that's the new hot term that's all over social media these days. This is what we're doing right now. We're self-quarantining, being careful, limiting our interactions with other people in large gatherings. This is being called social distancing. And social distancing is really important. And I do believe that this is something that our church should adhere and abide by, which is why we are decreasing our meetings. Also, another announcement is we won't be having small groups anymore moving forward. So after service, that's it. Y'all should leave. No, y'all can hang out wherever you guys want to go. So social distancing means no more gathering in large groups. Large groups is the main big no-no. That being said, I do believe that social hangouts is a crucial element of a church. Right? A church was meant to be a social community, and to completely eliminate that social element from a church is to completely kill the vibe and the life of the church. And I don't want to do that, and we should never do that. So I want you guys, for those of you who are A, healthy, B, for those of you who know that you are not coming into contact with many external factors or other people, if you know that you are safe and that you are healthy, feel free to gather in smaller groups and have smaller meetups and socialize with other people within the church. You can either meet here or elsewhere or outside. Please feel free to do that. But the general concept of social distancing is that you do want to limit your outdoor activity as much as possible, right? Stay at home as much as possible is the kind of bottom line. That is the bottom guideline. For those of you who can work at home, please work at home. For those of you that can avoid public transportation, please do try so as much as possible. We have a lot of people in our church who have cars. I just announced to them this morning that if you have a car, you should be giving rides. Those of you who have cars, you have now heard it from me officially from the pulpit, right? It is because this is a time where we want to minimize the risk of our beloved family as much as possible. And we have a lot of people taking public transportation. So please, if you have a car, if you can drive, we would greatly appreciate it if you can offer your service. Some of you already have been, but we will greatly appreciate it if you can offer your services to minimize the number of people who are taking public transportation in our church. But like I said, social distancing is important, but if done improperly, it could totally kill the whole point of a community. And there is one great way to combat that, and it's something that is unique to our generation in our 21st century, right? And that is called an online community. I personally have been bashing this like a lot. I've been talking about how an online community is not a real community, about how those people who meet virtually are not they're losers. And no, sorry, I didn't say that. But I've been bashing on the online community because it is very limiting, right? The digital world has very much limited our human face-to-face interactions, and that is a tragedy of this current modern digital era. That being said, nowadays, this online community has become the savior of all that is good and bad. It's now actually allowing churches to have worship in an online setting through live streaming. It's also a great platform on which we can still socialize as a church. Like, y'all don't have to actually meet up in small groups to share your prayer requests, right? We have something amazing called smartphones and tablets and social media, right? You guys are all part of a Katok chat group, yes, I think. If you're not, talk to Pastor Faith or someone afterwards. You guys should all be a part of that. For those of you who are, streaming from different states or from different places, if you don't have this kind of online community, wherever you are watching, totally feel free to reach out to us. We can totally add you. Like, that's the best part of online. Like, you can be in Canada or in Vancouver is Canada. You can be in Canada or Germany or any other place, and you can still have the same online fellowship with all of our New York brothers and sisters here. So this is the time to really revitalize our online community. I want to see something in our chat. Like, I know we have a brothers chat group that I'm just a part of that's been dead for like months, right? Like, no one's posted anything in that thing since like Tommy said like, who's coming to like barbecue I think that was like the last thing he posted. I don't know. It's like that chat room has been dead for months. Like, that's got to be revived, guys. Brothers, you guys hear me here? Yeah, that chat room has got to be revived, right? This is what I'm talking about. I know our sisters have their own chat group as well. We need to make an effort. We need to be very intentional about meeting online, about keeping contact with each other through Katok, through FaceTime, through Messenger, through various other social media means, because at the moment this is the safest and potentially the only way we really can keep this community strong. So please, we ask you to make that effort as we move forward. And I believe that's it. It's probably like the longest announcement I've ever given. Let's go ahead and turn to the Bible reading for today. The Bible reading for today is also going to be the longest Bible reading that we've ever had today. Everything's just long today, guys. Everything's just long. We'll be reading from 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 18. It's a long, long chapter, and I'm going to read it for you because I want you all to speak and spit as little as possible. So let me go ahead and read it. Please follow along on the screen. It's a great, great story, one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." And then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went into the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return to your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meloah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Amen. This is the word of the Lord. So today we are starting a new, actually it's not a series. Today I'll probably just end with today. We're starting a new sermon. We've finished our Gospel Pervaded by Power series last week, and we're doing a new sermon today. And it is just so fitting for the time. Today, the title for our sermon is "In Times of Trouble." In times of trouble. We're going to just go through the story that we just read today, and we're going to talk about the story of Elisha. In the passage for today, we see a very interesting and sudden twist in the narrative of Elijah. But for those of you who are not familiar with Elijah's story, let me give you some quick background information about this man, Elijah. It's really interesting. So we'll be looking at the entire story and relating it to how we can respond in our current times of trouble today. Now, what's interesting is that Elijah is considered one of the greatest figures of all time in the Old Testament. The Jewish people considered Elijah to be literally one of the greatest men alive. He was on par with Moses, and Moses was like way up there, right? Way up there. Moses and Elijah were considered greater than kings. They were in Judaic culture. That's why in Matthew 17, when Jesus climbs the Mount of Transfiguration, there were two figures there that appeared with him in that bright, miraculous moment. One was Moses, and the other was Elijah. These were the two greatest figures for all the Israelites. right? Moses signified the greatest authority concerning the laws, right? The Pentateuch, the Torah. These were the laws that the people of Israel abided by, and Moses was the one who gave them. That's why Moses was regarded with such a high regard. And Elijah was the authoritative figure for the prophets. And these were basically the two main components of the Old Testament that the people of Israel abided by, right? All of the Old Testament is grounded on the law and the prophets. That's why in Matthew 5:17, Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets." He's talking about the entire Old Testament. Don't think that I've come to abolish the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. And the one who represented those prophets was Elijah. But considering how important of a figure Elijah is, we actually know surprisingly little about him. He has no book in the Old Testament dedicated to him. He doesn't have his own book. Like, a lot of lesser people have their own books, but Elijah doesn't. Actually, all that we know about Elijah are found in 3 small chapters in 1 Kings and then 2 chapters in 2 Kings. That's it. Just five small chapters in the entire Bible. The Bible has like 1,169 or something like that. It's like almost 1,200 chapters in the entire Bible, and only 5 of them are dedicated to this great man Elijah, who is considered one of the most important figures in Israeli history. And even in those 5 chapters, we see more record of what he did and who he trained than we do about his background or who this man Elijah was. So Elijah, we see him being first introduced. He has no background story. He has no birth story. He's first introduced in the Bible in 1 Kings chapter 17. He is the prophet in Israel during the days of King Ahab. And one day he goes to Ahab, who is a very evil king. This is how his story starts. This is how he's introduced. One day he goes to Ahab and says to him, it's almost like a curse, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my words." He goes to Ahab and says, "You're not going to see any more rain in this land." Now, after this proclamation, the next verse says that the word of the Lord came to him. And this is really important. Remember that part for later. The word of the Lord came to him. And when the Lord of the word came to him, it told him to flee into the wilderness by the brook Cherith. And he lives in hiding, drinking water from that brook. And he eats food that ravens bring to him. This is a crazy story, right? So birds bring him food. They bring him bread in the morning, and then in the evening they bring him bread and meat. And that's what he lives by. This is how the story of Elijah begins. Like I just explained to you. This is the greatest figure in all of Israeli history. He has no background story, no birth story, no childhood story. It's just this. But right from the get-go, what we do know, what we can see, is that this Elijah is no ordinary man. Right? He's no ordinary prophet. There's clearly something different about him. The next story about Elijah in the next few verses is about how he blesses a widow and her son so that their jar of flour and jug of oil will miraculously replenish itself even after they have poured it out and eaten from it. It's the multiplication of food. It's an incredible miracle. What miracle does that bring to mind in the New Testament when we talk about the multiplication of food? We see, you guys know Jesus is what? Feeding of the 5,000, right? Well, Elijah was first. Elijah was first. And then we see in the next few verses that the son of that widow dies. And then Elijah proceeds to bring that dead boy back to life. Did you guys know that that is the first example of someone bringing a dead person back to life in the Bible? What's the classic example of resurrection in the New Testament? Well, of course, Jesus himself, right? Jesus himself on the cross. But other than that, who is someone that Jesus raised from the dead? Several people, but more prominently, Lazarus, right? You guys know Lazarus? Yeah. We see that parallel in the New Testament. Well, Elijah was first. Elijah was first. Right? There have been many prophets until now, but none like Elijah. Powerful, powerful stuff. Stuff that's only been replicated later on by Jesus himself in the New Testament. So that's chapter 17. And then we move on to chapter 18. Now, the author of 1 Kings wants to make it perfectly clear that Elijah was a powerful and special prophet, as if that wasn't already clear in chapter 17. He spends the entirety of chapter 18 describing in detail the great prophetic showdown. That's what I call it. I termed it that. It's the great prophetic showdown. Elijah had been hiding from King Ahab this entire time because God told him to, right? We just talked about that. King Ahab, mind you, was one of the most evil, one of the worst kings in all of Israeli history. He completely ignored God's laws. He worshipped idols, and he married Jezebel, who was one of the greatest enemies to God and his people. She was an evil, evil lady. Now, God eventually leads Elijah to go back to this king Ahab. Now remember, they're not on good terms because Ahab is an evil and wicked king, and Elijah has been bad-mouthing Ahab and preaching God's laws and talking bad about Ahab wherever he went. So they're not on good terms. In fact, Ahab probably wants to kill Elijah, which is why Elijah was in hiding. So when Elijah shows himself to Ahab, Ahab calls out to him and says, the troublemaker of Israel is here. And then Elijah boldly stands before Ahab and says, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. This we see in chapter 18, verses 18 and 19. This is what I call the great prophetic showdown. He challenges all these prophets, 950 prophets of Baal and Asherah. Guys, I want you guys to imagine what's going on here. In verse 20, it says that Ahab sent word to all the people in Israel. He did what Elijah said. He gathered all the people of Israel and all the prophets together at Mount Carmel. So you have the people of Israel here watching what's going on. And I'm guessing Ahab called them to show them just how powerless this one lone prophet was, right? So he was like, this is a good opportunity. I'm going to squash this guy, and all of Israel is going to see just how great a king I am. So everyone's gathered there. All of Israel is there. And all the prophets of Baal and Asherah are there. And there standing in front of them is this one man, Elijah. Just one guy. One. He's a team of one. Elijah, a prophet of our Lord God. And surrounding him are 450 prophets of Baal, who was the rain god of Canaan at the time. And the 400 prophets of Asherah, which is another goddess that they worshipped. And then it was just Elijah. Now Elijah, he was fed up with the sinful ways of Israel, and he turns and says to the people, he's like, guys, you guys have to stop being so indecisive. Like, see for yourself who you want to serve. Let me show you who the true God is. And I want you guys to stop worshiping these ridiculous idols and choose for yourself who you're going to serve as your one Lord and God. And then he asks for, you guys don't know this, right? He asks for 2 bulls to be brought. He says, bring me 2 bulls. He sets up 2 altars on stone and then puts wood on them. And says, lay the bulls on top of the altar. And he says, lay the altar with wood, but don't light it with fire. Now remember, the point of this showdown is to pray, as each side will pray to their respective gods and see who will send down fire. Guys, this is like an epic showdown. Like, I don't know if it can get any more epic than this, right? Elijah then tells the prophets to choose their bull first. He's like, man, all right, I'll give you guys the benefits. Like, you guys can go first. You guys can choose, right? There's no need to do like heads or tails. There's no need to do a coin toss. Like, you guys can choose whichever bull you want, and I'll just prepare the ladder. So the prophets of Baal and Asherah choose their bull, cut it up, and they prepare it. And then Elijah sits back and he watches. And then all morning, the Bible says, from morning till noon, the prophets of Baal cry out to their God, but nothing happens. By the time noon comes, so several hours had passed, Elijah's now there, and he goes up, man, Elijah's a beast, guys. What's the term that they use? He's savage? Is that the term that they use? I'm trying to be hip here, guys. Work with me. So this guy goes up to him, and he starts making fun of them. He's like, all right, what's wrong, guys? Is your God asleep? Huh? Maybe you should cry louder. Maybe he can't hear you. It actually says in the Bible, maybe he went to relieve himself. Like maybe he went to the bathroom. I kid you not, guys. This guy is savage here. Maybe Baal went to the bathroom, guys. Maybe you guys got to shout a little louder. And he's like goading them, right? He says maybe he's asleep. Maybe you need to wake him up. Still nothing. Right? Afternoon passes, several more hours passes, nothing happens. These prophets of Baal are they're cutting themselves because they're trying to do whatever they can to get this fire to come down and for Baal to listen to their prayers, but nothing. Elijah gets up and is like, all right, my turn. And then he doesn't just call down fire. He calls some helpers and he says, I want you all to dig a trench around this altar. So they dig a trench. And it says, I want you to get 4 jugs, 4 huge buckets of water, and then pour water over this bowl. So they make it soaking wet. It says, I want you to do that 3 more times, or 2 more times. So for a total of 3 times, they just douse the whole thing, the wood, the altar, the bowl, they just douse it with water, soak it with water, to the point where the Bible says that the trench around it was filled with water, right? So you can imagine just how much water they soaked it with. So obviously water it's not very conducive to burning, is it? Right? It makes it very hard to burn something if something is wet. And after that happened, Elijah prayed to God. Fire came down from heaven, right? Pretty obvious. And it says there in verse 38 that the fire consumed the burnt offering. Consumed, meaning completely ate it up. And the wood and the stones and the dust, it ate up everything. And licked up, I love this phrase, it licked up the water that was in the trench. There was nothing left. Everything there was bone dry. That's how strong and how powerful that fire was. Now, after this startling victory, it gets a little gory. But Elijah and the people then seized all the false prophets of those false gods, and he put them all to death. It was a total annihilation. It was a complete victory. After that, we get to our passage that we read today. And here, things take another surprising turn. In chapter 19, Elijah is threatened by Jezebel, that evil wife of Ahab. She hears what he has done, and she threatens to kill Elijah, even if it's the last thing she does. And then it says in verse 3 that Elijah was afraid. Guys, let's pause here for a second, right? Because the reason why I just explained the previous few chapters in detail to you was to show you how powerful of a man Elijah was. But then in verse 3 of chapter 19, it says, Elijah was afraid of this one person, this one human being. Right? This is a man that has stood boldly in front of the king that had been persecuting him. This is the guy that stood in front of 950 prophets in an epic showdown and completely obliterated them. And now he's afraid of this one woman, this one person. Verse 3 says that he was afraid, so he runs away. In the second half of verse 3, it says that he came to Beersheba and left his servant there. So scholars assume that he must have had an apprentice of some sorts. And considering the fact that he left his servant in a different town and then continued to run away in the wilderness shows that he was actually calling it quits. He was giving up his ministry, right? The scholars say that this act indicates that Elijah had completely given up on his ministry, because abandoning his disciple was like declaring that, I'm not gonna keep doing this anymore. So he left he's like, all right, you stay there because I'm gonna run away. Like, I'm done. He abandoned his servant and he went into the wilderness on his own. This suggestion is further confirmed by verse 4, where Elijah straight up says, "It's now over, God. Take my life. I want to die." That's what he says in verse 4. Elijah, the greatest prophet, hands down the greatest prophet in the Old Testament, did you know, at one point just goes to God and says, God, I can't do this anymore. I want to die. I can't keep living like this. Let's all repeat chapter 1, the first point of today's sermon together. In times of trouble, we oftentimes hide in despair. Each chapter is going to have a second part that I'm going to add on later on in the sermon. Now, you know what one of my favorite verses in the Bible is? I have a lot, but there's one verse that never fails to give me comfort. And it's James chapter 5, verse 17. James talks about Elijah, and this is what it says there. It says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. It's one of my favorite verses. I love the ESV, but it can be a little too rigid at times. NLT says this, Elijah was as human as we are. There's a Berean study Bible that says it even better. Elijah was a man just like us. I love that verse, don't you? Elijah was a man just like us. And if you know who Elijah was, this verse is incredibly comforting, if you know how powerful he was. Guys, one of the greatest prophets in all of history, the one who single-handedly took down nearly 1,000 other false prophets in an epic showdown, the first prophet on record in the Bible to multiply food and resurrect the dead, right? That prophet was a man, a human being, just like us. And James is telling the readers, James is telling us, hey guys, you're no different. Elijah was just a man, and you're just the same. See, the beauty of Elijah's story is that it captures just how human this guy was. This man who did these incredible things was frightened when a terrifying female, she was by far one of the most evil characters in the Bible, right? She has evil spiritual connections. We don't have time to get into Jezebel today, but when this evil female threatened his life, he was scared. And he grew so tired and worn out from fighting this battle that he eventually just wanted to give up and die. You know, there are some modern day like scholars that try to like psychoanalyze Elijah, and I thought it was kind of cool. Right? They judging from this story and from what they can say, they presume that Elijah was most likely suffering from manic depression. They didn't have those terms back then, right? But from today's language, he was suffering from manic depression with suicidal ideation. He wanted to die. And this is the first point for today. In times of trouble, guys, we oftentimes hide in despair. It doesn't matter if we just defeated 1,000 false prophets. In times of trouble, we often hide in despair. It doesn't matter if we are the greatest holy man in this generation. In times of trouble, guys, in times of extreme trouble, we may want to give up all hope, possibly even all hope of life. In times of trouble, we might hide in despair. Dearly beloved, the time that we are in right now is most definitely a time of trouble. You know, some of you may still be excited from the fact that you guys don't have any more classes, right? For those of you who are in school, like you don't have to go to school anymore. And for some of you, quarantine can sound like fun if you enjoy being at home. You don't have to go to work, you can work from home. But I mean, I don't want to scare people, guys, but to be honest, this pandemic is a really serious thing. This coronavirus is really, really serious. That's why it's not normal for our church to close our doors, guys. We've been open even during snowstorms and blizzards when all other churches have closed. Yeah, people are nodding their heads like, yeah, that was me. I had to drive through that. It's like, yeah, that's what our church does, right? We worship God through rain, through storm, through anything. We worship God, but this is like the first time, like, in ever, that we've been closing our doors like this, that we're even considering closing on Sundays, potentially, should it get even worse. It's not because we don't want to worship God, it's because the safety is really important, and this is getting really serious. Guys, the CDC projection for a period of over a year, they're saying this is like a worst case scenario, so don't get too afraid. But they have projected, one of the worst case scenario projections is that over the course of a little over a year, more than 214 million people will be infected in the United States. That's a lot. 214 million people. And considering the fatality rate, that means 1.7 million people will die. Guys, if this is a worst case scenario, but I want us to realize just how serious this actually is. I want you guys to understand why I like gave those like ridiculously like strict quarantine orders and stuff, like, 'cause this is actually serious. If things keep going the rate that it's going at right now, and people get more infected more and more, and this doesn't come to an end anytime soon, it's very, very realistic that 1.7 million people will die in the United States because of this. Just to put that number into reference, that's almost 3 times the number of people who died during the Civil War. That's 4 times the number of Americans who died from World War II, and over 10 times the number of soldiers who died during World War I. Guys, these are seriously troubling times. And for some of you guys, actually, troubling times is nothing new, right? For some of you, you guys have been battling with various difficulties in your life for a while now. For some of you, this coronavirus thing is nothing. Right? And it's nothing compared to some of the other things you face in your life. I know. Whatever it may be, we've all experienced these troubling times to some degree in our lives. And the Bible shows us that when that happens, it can be normal for us to want to hide in despair. It can be normal for us to want to give up on everything and lose hope. Elijah did so. And we are human just like he was. Here's where the second part of this chapter comes in. In times of trouble, we oftentimes hide in despair, but the Lord provides in miraculous ways. Now, when Elijah was done for, when he was burnt out and ready to give up on life, it says in verse 5 that an angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." And when he opened his eyes, he saw a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water right there by his head. He ate that food and went back to sleep. And then the angel came again and did the same thing again. Elijah ate and drank again a second time. Guys, this is crazy. Have you guys ever thought of that? Just miraculously food appearing before you. This actually isn't the first time the Lord has provided for Elijah in miraculous ways, right? Remember how I told you in chapter 17, God fed him with ravens? Birds came and brought him bread and meat. Well, here God's doing it again. This time in a moment when Elijah is on the brink of defeat, on the brink of death, God provides in miraculous ways. Dearly beloved, when you find yourselves in troubling times, you may want to give up or hide in despair, and that's okay. That's a very natural response. But never forget that in those moments, the Lord can and will provide for you in miraculous ways. I want you all to repeat after me. The Lord will provide for me in miraculous ways. Whether it's through the helping hand of a friend or a family, or whether it's through the word of truth preached to you at church, or whether it's a powerful verse that you find yourself in the Bible. It might just be a random stranger offering you help, or maybe a friend giving you money when you're in times of financial need, right? Never forget that the Lord can provide in miraculous ways. Sometimes ways that can't even be explained. I just explained to you natural ways, right? But maybe you might find something miraculously appear in your car, in your bank account. I don't know. Miraculous ways that the Lord could potentially work in your life. It's happened before, and it can definitely happen again. And this is how God acts sometimes, just as he did for Elijah. And with that powerful provision of the Lord, Elijah eventually received the strength to push on. For 40 days and 40 nights, the Bible says, to his next destination, he had that strength. And this is really interesting here. Because where God directs Elijah next is not back into the battlefield. He doesn't send Elijah back in. He's like, all right, good, I gave you food. You're good now, right? All right, let's go back. Let's go work again. No, that's not what he does. He gives him just enough food to get to his next destination, which is a cave. He goes to a cave. It's a little anticlimactic, to be honest, right? but that's where God takes him. It's like after this, the angels come, right? Give him bread and like all this stuff, and then he brings him to a cave. But that's what happens. Now, mind you, this is no ordinary cave. This cave is on Mount Horeb. This is the very mountain where Moses met the Lord in the book of Exodus, in chapter 33, right? This is the mountain of Revelation, and that is exactly what happens here. Elijah encounters God on this mountain, and it is a very, very special time. I want you all to repeat chapter 2 together with me. In times of trouble, we may try to find the Lord. Now, when Elijah arrives at this cave, the word of the Lord came to him. Remember what I said in chapter 17, how that was important? The word of the Lord came to Elijah, right? Isn't that a very interesting phrase? The word of the Lord came to Elijah and said to him. When I see this, I think to myself, John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I look at this, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's Jesus. That's got to be Jesus. Remember I said how you can find Jesus in the Bible in so many places? That's him right there. The word of the Lord came to Elijah. And as they were talking, God tells Elijah to go outside and stand on the mountain before the Lord. This is just like when we saw Moses standing on this very same mountain to see the glory of the Lord as he passed by Moses in Exodus 33. So right now we have Elijah who is standing outside waiting to meet the Lord in this cave, right outside this cave on Mount Horeb. And actually this is what a lot of us do. We do this too, right? When we are in times of trouble, we seek the Lord, right? We're like Elijah. We're standing outside and we're like, all right, God, where are you? Like, I need you now. We seek the Lord. I mean, we don't always do that. Sometimes we fail miserably and plop down, right? And we just totally forget about God because we're human beings and we're sinful beings. But that's what we just talked about in chapter 1, right? Sometimes we fail, guys. Sometimes in times of trouble, we despair, right? We want to quit. We want to hide in despair. But the Lord provides in miraculous ways. That's what we just talked about in chapter 1. The Lord provides in miraculous ways. And through his miraculous ways, guys, we are able to pick ourselves up again and keep moving forward like Elijah. And that's when we will find ourselves at this point where we start seeking the Lord in times of trouble. In times of trouble, we will seek God's help to overcome it. And that's what Elijah is doing right here. He's having a hard time. He barely got enough strength to get to this cave. And now God's like, go outside. I'm about to meet you. So he goes out and he's waiting. He's seeking the Lord. As the Lord was passing by, Elijah sees a great strong wind in verse 11. And it says there that the wind was so strong that it tore the mountains and broke rocks into pieces. That's some crazy strong wind right there. That's how strong this wind was. But the Lord was not in the wind. Elijah then felt an earthquake shake the very ground on which he was standing, and he thought, yes, this is the great power of the Lord, right? The great power that can shake the ground. But it says that the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, Elijah saw a great fire, and I'm sure at this point Elijah thought, yep, this is it. This has got to be it. This is the Lord, right? Because this is the great fire that came down on the bull during my epic showdown, right? I saw this fire before. This is the great fire of God. This is the power of the Lord that I was waiting for. But then in verse 12 it says that the Lord was not in the fire. And then it says there, after the fire, it says that there was the sound of a low whisper. The sound of a low whisper. Guys, where does Elijah find God? In that low whisper. Guys, think about it from the perspective of Elijah for a second. Let's say that you are Elijah. You just came back from a tiring battle. You were victorious. But as soon as you go back, you realize that someone was trying to kill you, so you run away. And then as you're running away, you're sick and tired of it all. You just want to quit. You just want to die. But then the Lord miraculously provides you with enough strength to get to this mountain and to have this encounter with God. Like, this is your moment, right? You're expecting to meet him. This is your turning point. This is where everything is going to change now, because you're about to witness the fullness of the glory of God Almighty. You're expecting a powerful wind or a mighty earthquake or a raging, frightening fire to showcase the greatness of God. But instead, you get a low whisper. You get a low whisper. A small voice. This is the God whom you've been waiting for this entire time. Let's go back to the full title of chapter 2. Remember we said, in times of trouble, we may try to find the Lord. Here's the second half. But the Lord may speak to us in a low whisper. Dearly beloved, it's nothing new that God works in ways that are different from what we expect or want. This is nothing new, right? The Israelites wanted a military Messiah to free them from the Roman Empire, but Jesus came to die for them so that they could be free from sin and death. Right? Elijah may have wanted to see or hear God in a mightier form so that he could be empowered by it, so that he could maybe defeat Ahab and Jezebel by that power of God. But instead, he hears a low whisper. Dearly beloved, in times of trouble, the Lord may speak to us in a low whisper. When the world around us is in shambles and falling apart, when all around us is in absolute chaos, the Lord may speak to us in this low whisper. One of the expressions that I love the most is it's eye of a storm. Do you guys know what that means? An eye of a storm. We have some pictures prepared to show you. Have you guys ever seen like a bird's eye view of an eye of a storm? It's absolutely breathtaking. It's really beautiful, right? This is what it looks like. That white part, like that cloud, that's a storm. And then right in the middle, it's just nothing. It's clear. It's crystal clear. We can look at the next one too. Yeah, I mean that's like much closer up, right? It's like a cyclone right there, and then right in the middle is nothing. It's absolutely clear. And if that nothingness is above you, you're not experiencing a storm at all. You're experiencing like really good weather. Like there's nothing going on. No winds, no clouds, just pure sunshine. Scientifically, these crazy cyclone storms will have a surprisingly calm center because of like the low barometric pressure in the center region. And actually, the stronger the cyclone, the more defined and clear the eye. And I feel like this is the perfect representation of God's low whisper in our troubling times. I mean, we can put the pictures down now. It may feel like the world around us is falling apart, like there's a storm ripping everything out of its roots around us. But in the center, God will speak to us in this soft whisper. But okay, well, then what does it mean for us, right? What does it mean for us? Well, it means that we need to be in a place where we can hear this low whisper. If God speaks in a low whisper, we need to be quiet enough to listen. We need to be ready to listen. Guys, see what Elijah does here. So he was looking for God in the wind, in the earthquake, and in the fire. But then as soon as he hears the low whisper, he knows. Yep, this is God right here. He knows immediately that it's the Lord. And then in verse 13, it says that he wraps his face with his cloak, and he stands at the entrance to the cave to hear this small voice. And that is when he meets God. The wrapping of the face is because no one can actually see God and live. That's why you guys, if you remember in Exodus 33, where God passes by Moses, do you guys remember what he does? He covers Moses' face with his hand so that he only sees the back of God in his glory. So when Elijah is covering his face here with his cloak, he knows, yep, this is God. This is for real this time. He prepares himself. Guys, we need to recognize that God speaks to us in this low whisper, and we need to be ready to hear him, as Elijah was. I found this message today to be so fitting for our church today, because I feel like we right now are going into this eye of the storm. The world around us is falling into chaos. It really is. Fear has grappled everyone here. But we here should never lose sight of the peace that we can find in this eye. Some of our older members are kind of upset because we've suspended our weekly gatherings and we've decreased the opportunities to gather and worship and pray together. And I get it, and I agree that it's unfortunate. And this is a great problem to have, right? That people want to come to church. That's awesome, right? That's awesome. I'm glad people are upset that they can't come to church. That's a great thing to be upset about. But actually, this time of social distancing and self-quarantining can actually be seen as an incredible opportunity to listen to this low whisper of the Lord. Guys, think of this as Elijah's cave. Think of this next period in your life right now, these next few months. I don't know how long it's going to last. Think of these next few months as Elijah's cave for you. Sometimes this cave is necessary in our spiritual lives. It's a place of retreat, a place of renewing, a place of finding God once again. Guys, notice how after God feeds Elijah through the angels, he does not send him straight back into ministry. In verse 7, the angel tells Elijah to eat and drink, for the journey ahead of him is too great for him. And that journey led him to a cave. This cave. He gave him just enough food to get to this cave. It shows that Elijah's cave was necessary for Elijah to be restored again. Dearly beloved, I hope we can all appreciate this cave that we're about to enter now. A cave where we can be isolated from other distractions, other external sources. A cave where we can focus on that low whisper of the Lord. Guys, to be honest, I'm actually really, really excited. I shared this with our adults this morning. I'm actually really excited for the next few weeks, for the next few months. I mean, I'm sad that we can't gather as a church, but I'm so excited for this time that I'm about to spend with God together. I haven't had time like this on my hands in a long time. I think the last time that I had this much time with God was when I took a year off from college. And during that year off, I wasn't going to school, I wasn't working, I had all the time in the world. So I actually spent time with God. It was one of my most intimate years with God. It was one of my most passionate, my most, invigorating years with God. I think I went that entire year without sinning at all or very much. It wasn't hard at all because I was just so in love with God, so deeply connected with God during that 1 year because I had the opportunity and the time to do so. And I remember thinking at that time, towards the end, someone told me, you're never going to have another time like this again. Don't take this time for granted. And I think back on the past 10 years of my life now, and I'm yeah, I have never had a time like that since. I've been doing ministry nonstop, been studying, been working for God nonstop. I have not had time like that since. And I miss it. I miss that time where I can just wake up in the morning and not have to worry about anything else and just pray to God and just have that intimate moment with Him. And the reason why I'm so excited for the next few weeks is because, guys, I think we can all collectively enjoy part of that again. God's giving us an opportunity to have that intimate moment with Him again. And it brings me tears of joy to think that I can once again taste that intimacy with God that I haven't tasted in so long. This is an incredible opportunity, guys. An incredible, incredible opportunity. Guys, this is the time where our primary focus can be on actually meditating on His Word, spending hours in prayer that I actually want to spend with Him every day. Please, 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 I ask you not to spend this time in vain. I know there are a lot of other things that you may be worrying about, but focus on the eye of the storm. Focus on God. The world around you may be crumbling, but the Lord will provide, just as He miraculously provided for Elijah. Your calling now is to focus on Him and to wait for that low whisper in your life that God is so desperately trying to give to you. To sum up today's message, in conclusion, guys, we can see the Lord sending Elijah on a new journey after all of this. And this is the beautiful, beautiful conclusion of this particular story. So everything that I've talked about until now was only the first half of Elijah's ministry. This was like the halfway. Elijah thought that everything was over, but this was only the halfway point. And after this is when the second half starts. In times of trouble, guys, we may want to give up, but He gives us strength to continue. In times of trouble, we may want to find God in other places, but He comes to us in a low whisper. In times of trouble, He speaks to us, revives us, and gets us ready to send us out again. This time emboldened and equipped, this time trained and ready. God gives Elijah his most important calling, his most important ministry that is left. This is when He gives it. The second half of his ministry is the most important part. And this is when he gets it. Some scholars say that this second half of Elijah's ministry was actually his prime. Right? This was the true calling that Elijah had received. God calls him to anoint various kings. And then also, the really important thing, this is when He calls Elisha his disciple. So, so important. But this all came after Elijah had that breakthrough in the cave. Dearly beloved, I genuinely pray that this time that you spend in your respective caves with the Lord, I pray that this will be a time where you receive your most prominent calling from God. I pray that this will be the time where you hear that low whisper of the Lord and you find that clear direction in your life that God's been waiting to give to you. I pray that this will be the time where you will indeed be strengthened and revived, no longer burdened by the storm raging around you, but now resting peacefully in the eye of the storm that you now keep with you wherever you go, the peace of the Holy Spirit. Dearly beloved, I pray that this will be a time where you come to experience the intimacy with God, that life-giving intimacy with God where you know Him as deeply as He knows you. Dearly beloved, Elijah was a man just like us. And this is the journey that God led him through. And this is the journey that He is now calling you into as well. So let us dive into this blessing, this spiritual breakthrough that the Lord has prepared for us, just as He had for Elijah. Let's take this time to pray now.
How wide, oh, how wide, Lord, how deep, oh, how deep, Lord, how great, oh,
takes a few things to enter into this cave, but the first and foremost thing is our intentionality, guys. We need to be intentional about this. God will give us the strength. He will send the ravens. He will prepare all other things, but we need to be the ones to actually pick ourselves up and go to this cave. This was a 40-day, 40-night journey for Elijah to go to this cave, not more. That is where God is calling us to right now. This time of quarantine, this time of social distancing. Don't just let it pass, guys. Take the steps that you need to walk into this cave of intimacy with God, this place where you can be connected with Him once more.